My name is Ilara Vance, and I am 28 years old. For most of those years, I have been a ghost in my own family, a footnote in the grand, boisterous narrative of my brother Liam. Our family home wasn't a democracy. It was a monarchy, and Liam was the heir apparent. I was the court jester they forgot to laugh at. It started as these things often do in the small, sun-drenched moments of childhood that curdle into defining memories. When I was 7, I spent an entire summer collecting butterflies. I built a sprawling, multi-chambered habitat for them in a glass tank, carefully labeling each chrysalis, sketching the patterns on their wings in a notebook with a reverence that felt holy. I documented their life cycles with the meticulousness of a seasoned biologist. The day my prize monarch, a magnificent creature with wings like fiery sunsets, emerged, I ran into the house, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs, to show my parents. My father glanced up from the sports page, offering a cursory, "That's nice, Ilara." My mother, polishing a silver frame, smiled vaguely. "Don't let them get loose in the house, honey. They can be messy." That same afternoon, Liam, who was 9, came home with a plastic third-place trophy from a summer soccer league he'd barely paid attention to. It was hoisted onto the center of the mantelpiece. My butterfly sketches were eventually used as scrap paper, and the tank was relegated to the garage to store old rags. This was the rhythm of our lives. Liam's achievements were tangible, loud, and most importantly, understandable to my parents. His touchdowns, his debate team victories, his business school acceptance letter. They were solid bricks in the foundation of a successful life they could brag about at dinner parties. My passions were ethereal. They were quiet, strange, and worst of all, impractical. I wasn't just the second child. I was the other child, the dreamer, the one with her head in the clouds. It wasn't said with malice, not usually. It was stated as a fact, a law of nature in our household. "Liam is the doer," my father would say with a proud clap on his son's shoulder. "Ilara is the thinker." But the way he said thinker sounded a lot like drifter. My sanctuary was the night sky. My grandfather, my mother's father, and a man I barely knew before he passed, had left me his old brass telescope. It was a clunky, heavy thing, but when I first focused the lens on the moon, the world fell away. The pockmarked craters, the stark, silent beauty, it wasn't a dead rock. It was a destination. The stars weren't just distant lights. They were suns, each with its own potential story, its own retinue of worlds. In the cold, silent dark of the backyard, I was not Ilara Vance, the disappointing daughter. I was an explorer. I was charting the infinite. When it came time for college applications, the battle I'd been avoiding my whole life finally commenced. I wanted to study astrophysics. The word landed on our dinner table like a lead weight. Astro, what my father asked, putting down his fork. Physics. I repeated, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be. The study of space. Planets, stars, galaxies. Liam, home for the weekend from his pre-law program, snorted. "So you want to be a professional stargazer? Is there a 401k for that?" My mother wrung her hands. "But Ilara, what kind of a job is that? You're so bright. You could go into marketing like your aunt. Or teaching." "I want to be a scientist." I said the words, feeling fragile in the air. "Scientists don't make any money unless they're inventing some new gadget." My father declared, his voice taking on the tone of a final verdict. "It's a dead end, Ilara. It's a hobby. Liam is building a future. You're chasing fireflies." The butterfly comment, resurrected after all those years, stung more than anything else. He didn't even remember, but I did. I saw the ghost of my monarch's wings fluttering in the space between us. They refused to pay for an out-of-state school with a top-tier physics program. They agreed only to fund my tuition at the state university, provided I took some business classes just in case. I agreed, but it was a lie of omission. I enrolled in the minimum required business course Intro to Microeconomics, which I nearly failed and poured my entire being into the physics department. My family saw my university years as a phase, a long, expensive detour before I came to my senses. My phone calls home were a masterclass in deflection. "How are your classes, honey?" my mother would ask. "They're good? Challenging? Are you meeting any nice young men? Maybe in that business class?" "Not really, Mom. I'm pretty busy with lab work." Lab work. I could hear the confusion, the disinterest. "Well, don't overdo it. Your brother just made the dean's list again, and he's been elected treasurer of his fraternity. He's networking, you see. That's what's important." I never told them about the sleepless nights spent wrestling with quantum mechanics, the thrill of solving an equation that described the curvature of spacetime, the sense of belonging I was starting to feel among the other strange, quiet kids who found solace in the language of the universe. To them, I was just a Lara the hobbyist biding her time until reality set in. They had no idea that I had already found my reality. It was just much, much bigger than theirs. My first 2 years were a blur of foundational coursework, the grueling but necessary mathematics and classical mechanics that underpin everything else. I lived in the library fueled by lukewarm coffee and the burning desire to prove something, though, to whom I was no longer sure. The initial fire to show my family they were wrong had slowly been cooling, replaced by a much purer, more personal ambition. I wasn't just running from their disappointment anymore. I was running towards something magnificent. The turning point came in my junior year in a class on stellar evolution taught by Dr. Eris Thorne. She was a legend in the department, a brilliant, no-nonsense woman with eyes that seemed to hold the same ancient light as the pulsars she studied. She didn't lecture. She commanded. She strode across the stage, chalk dust flying from her fingertips as she scrawled elegant, terrifying equations on the blackboard, her voice a low, captivating hum that made the death of a star sound like the most beautiful poetry. Most students were terrified of her. I was mesmerized. One afternoon, she posed a hypothetical problem about the spectral analysis of a white dwarf star being polluted by planetary debris. It was a complex question meant to stump us, to push us beyond the textbook. As the lecture hall sat in stunned silence, a thought flickered in my mind, a connection to an obscure paper I'd read on asteroid composition. My hand shot up before I could second-guess myself. My voice trembled as I spoke. "Dr. Thorne, what if the pollution isn't from a rocky planet, but from a Kuiper belt-like object? The specific absorption lines for water, ice, and methane would be different, wouldn't they? They might be masked by the star's own hydrogen and helium spectra, unless you used a multipolarimetric filter to isolate the reflected light from the debris itself." I trailed off, suddenly aware that the entire hall of 200 students was staring at me. My cheeks burned. I expected Dr. Thorne to dismiss the idea, to point out some fatal flaw. Instead, she stood frozen for a moment, her chalk-covered hand hovering in midair. She stared at me, her sharp eyes boring into mine. There wasn't annoyance or dismissal in her gaze. There was recognition. "That," she said, her voice quiet but carrying to the back row, "is a very good question, Ms. Vance. Stay after class." That single command changed the trajectory of my life. My family had taught me that my quiet nature and unusual interests were liabilities. Dr. Thorne was the first person in a position of authority who saw them as an asset. She saw the years I'd spent in my backyard, not just aimlessly gazing, but observing, questioning. She saw the pattern recognition that allowed me to connect disparate ideas. In her office, a chaotic wonderland of stacked books, star charts, and half-empty mugs, she didn't coddle me. She grilled me. She pushed my theory, poked holes in it, forced me to defend it with mathematics, not just intuition. For an hour, my brain felt like it was being stretched and reformed. It was the most exhilarating conversation I had ever had. At the end of it, she leaned back in her chair, a slow smile spreading across her face. "You don't think like a student, Vance. You think like a researcher." I have a spot on my research team for the Keck Observatory Remote Observation Project. We're hunting for exoplanets. It's mostly data analysis long nights and very little glory. You start Monday. I didn't just say yes. I felt like I was breathing for the first time. This was my tribe. My team was a small group of graduate students and postdocs people who spoke my language. We spent our nights in a darkened control room on campus, connected via high-speed link to the giant eye of the Keck telescope on Mauna Kea in Hawaii. We didn't talk about business deals or fraternity parties. We talked about tidal-locking stellar wobble and the tantalizing possibility of finding a tiny rocky world orbiting in the habitable zone of a distant star. My disconnect with my family widened into a chasm. I stopped trying to explain what I was doing because their frame of reference was gone. I'm a research assistant for one of my professors, I'd say. Is it paid? My father would ask the eternal pragmatist. A small stipend, I'd admit. He would sigh, the sound crackling with disappointment over the phone line. Ilara Liam is doing a paid internship this summer at a top law firm in the city. He's making connections. What are you doing? Helping a teacher grade papers? I'm analyzing light curves from a G-type main sequence star 40 light-years away, I wanted to scream. We think we've found a gas giant, a hot Jupiter so close to its star that its year is only 3 days long. Its atmosphere is probably being stripped away by the solar wind, and we might be the first people in human history to witness it. But I said nothing of the sort. I just said something like that, Dad. The lie was easier. It was a shield. Their casual dismissal hurt less when I gave them less to dismiss. I was building a life they couldn't see, a world they couldn't touch, and every small success, every validated hypothesis, every nod of approval from Dr. Thorne added another brick to the wall I was constructing between my heart and their judgment. When I was accepted into the university's Ph.D. program with Dr. Thorne as my advisor and my funding fully secured by research grants, I told my family I was going to grad school. Liam laughed. Of course you are. Another 5 years of avoiding the real world, huh, Lara? Don't worry, I'll be able to support you in your old age with my partner's salary. My mother just sounded weary. More school. Well, as long as it makes you happy, dear. It was the same tone she'd used for the butterflies. A placating, gentle pat on the head for the strange child with her strange little hobbies. They had no concept of the scale of it. To them, it was just an extension of college, a refusal to grow up. They didn't understand that I wasn't avoiding the real world. I was discovering new ones, and I was doing it entirely without them. The doctoral program was a descent into a new kind of obsession. It wasn't about grades anymore. It was about contributing a single original sentence to the grand conversation of science. My family imagined me in a dusty library, a perennial student. The reality was a grueling cycle of research failure and infinitesimal progress. My world shrank to the size of my lab, the remote observatory control room, and the endless pages of code I wrote to sift through the cosmic noise. My dissertation topic was ambitious even by Dr. Thorne's standards. It wasn't just about finding exoplanets, it was about finding a new way to find them. The prevailing methods, transit photometry and radial velocity, were good, but they were biased towards finding large planets orbiting close to their stars. They were less effective at finding smaller Earth-sized planets in wider, more temperate orbits, the very places we might expect to find life. My idea was radical. It was born from that first conversation in Dr. Thorne's office. Instead of looking for the shadow of a planet or the wobble of a star, I wanted to look for the planet's faint reflected light, polarized by its atmosphere or surface. It was like trying to spot a single firefly next to a brilliant searchlight from 100 miles away. The signal was buried under layers of noise from the host star interstellar dust and our own atmospheric interference. Everyone said the math was impossible, the signal-to-noise ratio too low to be useful. My family's voices were a constant faint echo in my head. Impractical, a dead end, chasing fireflies. For 3 years, they were right. I built simulations that failed. I booked telescope time and came back with data that was a chaotic mess of cosmic static. I filled whiteboards with equations that led to contradictions and paradoxes. Doubts gnawed at me in the lonely hours before dawn. Maybe I was just the dreamy girl they always thought I was. Maybe I had mistaken a childhood fantasy for a genuine scientific aptitude. The phone calls home became less frequent, more perfunctory. Still in the lab, Ilara, my mother, would ask, "You should get out more." Liam and his fiancée just put a down payment on a beautiful house in the suburbs. It has a yard for their golden retriever. They're so settled. That's great, Mom. I'd say, my eyes burning from staring at a screen for 16 hours. Behind me, a fresh set of data from the Atacama Cosmology Telescope was processing. Another potential dead end. "When are you going to be done with all this?" Schooling, my father would inevitably ask. "You're 26 years old. You need to start thinking about your future." My future was right here in the hum of the servers and the ghost of a signal I was chasing. How could I explain that I was trying to build a key to unlock the secrets of alien worlds? They would only hear the word alien and think it was a childish game. Dr. Thorne was my rock. She never wavered. When I would stumble into her office, defeated and ready to give up, she would listen patiently, then point to a single line in a mountain of equations. "What about this? Did you account for stellar granulation noise at this frequency?" She didn't offer platitudes, she offered pathways. She treated my failures not as endpoints, but as data points. The breakthrough came at 3:17 a.m. on a Tuesday in November. I was alone in the control room running a new filtering algorithm I'd designed. It was a desperate last-ditch attempt, a combination of Fourier analysis and machine learning that I'd cobbled together. I was looking at the data from Kepler 186, a red dwarf star 500 light-years away, known to have a system of 5 planets. One of them, Kepler 186f, was the first Earth-sized planet discovered in the habitable zone of another star. It was the perfect test case. For weeks, the data had been noise. But on this run, with the new algorithm applied, something flickered. A pattern? A sine wave, impossibly faint, impossibly regular, emerged from the static. It was the signature of polarized light oscillating in a perfect steady rhythm. The rhythm of a planet rotating on its axis. My algorithm hadn't just found the planet. It had detected the polarized reflection off its surface, or atmosphere, modulated by its daily spin. My heart stopped. My hands trembled as I ran diagnostics. It wasn't an instrument error. It wasn't a glitch. It was real. I had isolated the light of a world a quintillion miles away. I stumbled out of my chair and was physically sick in the hallway trash can, my body convulsing from the shock and adrenaline. I called Dr. Thorne, my voice a ragged whisper. "Eris," I choked out, using her first name for the first time. "I think I got it. Kepler 186f. I have a signal." Silence on the other end. Then her voice, thick with sleep but instantly sharp. "Send it to me. Now." The next few months were a whirlwind of verification. We used other telescopes, reran the data, and had independent teams secretly try to replicate the results. It held. The method, which Dr. Thorne had insisted on calling the Vance Meridian method in our first draft of the paper, worked. Not only did it confirm the planet's existence, but the specifics of the polarized light suggested the presence of a significant liquid on its surface. The faint, rhythmic signal was the glint of an alien ocean. Our paper was fast-tracked for publication in Nature. The preprint version posted online sent an earthquake through the astrophysics community. My inbox exploded. I was getting emails from professors I'd only read about in textbooks, invitations to speak at conferences in Geneva and Tokyo. I was still Ilara Vance, living on a grad student stipend, eating instant noodles in my tiny apartment. But in the world of science, I had just become someone else entirely. I told my family I was finishing my dissertation. "That's good, dear," my mother said over the phone. "The wedding planner for Liam and Jessica is just a marvel." We've finally settled on the color scheme, a lovely champagne and blush. I'm defending my thesis next month. I said, a small final attempt to convey the magnitude of the moment. Oh, is that like a final exam? My father asked. Well, hit the books, kiddo. Get it over with. It's high time you joined the real world. I didn't bother correcting him. I didn't tell him that my defense was a formality, that my examining committee included 2 of the world's leading experts in the field who were flying in just to be there, or that my paper was already being cited by research groups around the globe. I didn't tell them that the hobby they'd dismissed my entire life had just borne fruit that was about to change the way humanity looked for its neighbors in the dark. I hung up the phone and looked out my window at the city lights, which did their best to blot out the stars. It didn't matter. I didn't need to see them anymore. I knew they were there. And I had found a new way to listen. The wall between me and my family was complete. It was no longer made of brick. It was made of light years, and I was finally free. The invitation to my graduation ceremony was for my family an inconvenience. Graduation in the Vance household was a concept firmly attached to Liam. His high school graduation had been a catered affair. His university graduation, a weekend-long celebration. His law school graduation was spoken of in hushed, reverent tones, a coronation in the making. My own graduations had been non-events. I didn't even attend my high school ceremony. For my undergraduate degree, they'd mailed a card with a $100 bill inside. No need for all that pomp and circumstance, my father had said. The important thing is the piece of paper. This time for my doctorate, I sent a formal invitation. Not because I expected them to come, but as a final quiet gesture. A bookend. The call came a week later. It was my mother. Ilara, honey, about this graduation thing. She began, her voice hesitant. It's just that the date is very awkward. Liam and Jessica are closing on their house that Friday, and we were all supposed to go over for a celebratory dinner. Your father has to sign some of the loan papers with them. Okay, Mom, I said. The lack of disappointment in my own voice surprised me. It was just information. It's not that we're not proud of you, dear. Finishing all that school is a real achievement in perseverance. The word perseverance was doing a lot of heavy lifting, a polite substitute for stubbornness. It's just, you know how it is. This is a big step for your brother. I understand, I said. And I did. Their universe was small and orbited a single brilliant sun named Liam. I was a distant cold rock in the outer system. It was the physics of our family, and you can't argue with physics. The story should have ended there. I would walk across the stage, get my diploma, and celebrate with the people who mattered, Dr. Thorne, and my lab team, my chosen family. But then, my Aunt Carol, my mother's sister, called me, Ilara. Your mother tells me you're finally getting your doctor title, and they're not going. Aunt Carol was the family's rogue element, a history professor at a small liberal arts college. She was the only one who had ever asked me what stars I was looking at. It's a busy time for them, I said, giving the official excuse. Aunt Carol let out a very un-aunt-like snort. Busy. Right. Richard and Helen have been busy ignoring your brilliance since you were born. I'll see what I can do. I don't know what she said, but 2 days later, my mother called back, her voice strained. Ilara, we've moved some things around. We can be there. Your father, Liam, and I. Jessica has to work, unfortunately. We'll have to leave right after the main ceremony, though, to get to the bank. You don't have to, I said, and I meant it. Their presence now felt like an obligation, a performance. No, we want to. We'll be there. And so, on a bright, impossibly sunny June morning, my family sat in the cavernous university auditorium. I spotted them from my seat amongst the other doctoral candidates. My father looking impatient, checking his watch. My mother scanning the program with a confused expression. And Liam dressed in a suit that probably cost more than my rent, scrolling through his phone the picture of bored condescension. They were there physically, but they were a million miles away. I felt a strange sense of peace. Their presence wasn't for me. It was for them, a box to be checked to appease Aunt Carol. I no longer craved their approval. My validation had come from the quiet hum of a supercomputer, the elegant confirmation of a mathematical proof, the respectful nod of a fellow scientist. The ceremony was just that, a ceremony, a symbolic end to a journey they had never been a part of. I smoothed the heavy velvet panels on my doctoral robes, black with a rich dark blue trim for the Doctor of Philosophy. The other candidates were buzzing, a nervous, excited energy filling the air. I felt calm. The work was done. The speeches began. The dean, the provost, a distinguished alumnus. I let the words wash over me, my thoughts drifting to the next project, a plan to use the James Webb Space Telescope to apply the Vance Meridian method to the TRAPPIST-1 system. My family looked bored to tears. Liam was openly texting. My father was whispering to my mother, probably about interest rates. Then the Chancellor of the university, a stately woman named Dr. Alistair, took the podium to confer the degrees. Before we call our candidates to the stage, she began, her voice ringing with authority through the massive hall. I want to take a moment to speak about the very purpose of an institution like this. We are not just here to educate. We are here to foster discovery. We are here to push the boundaries of human knowledge. I saw Liam roll his eyes. This was exactly the kind of impractical academic talk he despised. Once in a generation, Dr. Alistair continued, her gaze sweeping across the crowd. A student comes along who doesn't just learn from us, but who fundamentally changes the way we see the world. A student whose work will be the foundation upon which science is built for the next century. The auditorium grew quiet. The standard graduation platitudes had suddenly taken a very specific turn. For 50 years, our search for life beyond Earth has been a search for shadows, for wobbles, for the indirect evidence of other worlds. We listened for whispers in the dark. But one of our graduates today has taught us how to see a glint of light in that darkness. Her doctoral dissertation, already hailed as one of the most significant astronomical breakthroughs of our time, has given us a new tool, a new sense with which to explore the cosmos. I felt my heart start to beat a little faster. Dr. Thorne, sitting in the front row with the other faculty, caught my eye and gave me a small, proud smile. Her development of what the scientific community is now calling the Vance Meridian method has, for the first time, allowed us to directly detect the polarized reflected light from an Earth-sized exoplanet, giving us insight into its rotation and surface composition. To put it simply, she didn't just find a new world, she gave us a new way to find all of them. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw my brother Liam finally look up from his phone, a flicker of annoyance on his face, as if he'd heard a familiar word out of context. Vance. Dr. Alistair smiled warmly. This work is so groundbreaking, so essential to the future of this university's research and to the future of astronomy itself, that the Board of Trustees has taken the unprecedented step of establishing a new permanent research center funded for the next decade, the Vance Institute for Exoplanetary Science. A wave of murmurs and applause rippled through the audience. My father had stopped whispering. He was staring at the Chancellor, his brow furrowed in deep confusion. My mother's program was clutched in her hand, her knuckles white. It is therefore, the Chancellor's voice boomed, reaching a crescendo, the highest honor of my academic career, to preside over a ceremony that is not just for our graduates, but in a very real sense is being held in honor of one of them. I am speaking, of course, of the young woman whose name will now be synonymous with the next era of discovery. She looked directly at my section. The spotlight operator cued bathed our rows in a brilliant white glare. Will she please stand, the university's newest and perhaps one of its most important doctors? Dr. Elara Vance. The world seemed to slow down. The applause that erupted was not the polite clapping for a student. It was a roar. It was a standing ovation led by the entire faculty on stage. My fellow graduates, my teammates, the other science Ph.D.s who knew exactly what this meant, were on their feet, cheering, whistling. I rose, my legs unsteady. The light was blinding. I couldn't see individual faces in the crowd, only a sea of them. But I could feel with every fiber of my being the specific laser-focused stare of 3 people. My hand automatically went to smooth my robes as I stood in the center of the storm. The cameras from the university press flashed. Dr. Thorne was crying unabashedly, her face a mask of pure pride. And somewhere in the 10th row, my family was frozen. I couldn't see their expressions clearly, but I could imagine them. The shock, the utter world-tilting disbelief, the dawning, horrifying realization that the quiet, disappointing, hobby-obsessed girl they had tolerated for 28 years, the one whose graduation they had almost skipped for a bank appointment, was the person the entire university was now honoring. The ceremony wasn't an obstacle on their way to celebrate Liam's success. For this one singular moment, the ceremony was my success. And they were forced to bear witness. Standing in the blinding white light of the spotlight, the roar of the auditorium, a physical pressure against my skin, I felt a profound and unnerving calm. The Alara of 10 years ago, of 5 years ago, even of 1 year ago, would have been desperate to see her family's faces, to drink in their shock, to finally feel the vindication of their awe. She would have craved that moment of reckoning, the one where their carefully constructed reality shattered against the undeniable truth of her achievement. But as I stood there, I found I wasn't looking for them at all. My gaze was fixed on Dr. Eris Thorne, who was beaming tears, tracking paths through the light dusting of makeup she rarely wore. I looked at my lab mates who were hooting and stomping their feet. These were the people who had seen me at 4 a.m. bleary-eyed and defeated. They had argued with me, challenged me, and celebrated with me. My triumph was their triumph. My family in that moment felt impossibly distant, like figures in an old photograph from a life I no longer lived. The walk across the stage was a dream. The Chancellor, Dr. Alistair, didn't just shake my hand. She pulled me into a brief, firm hug. "The world is watching, Dr. Vance," she whispered in my ear. "Don't keep them waiting," as she handed me my doctoral hood and the diploma. The weight of the velvet and the crispness of the parchment were the only things that felt real. The reception afterwards was held in the university's stunning new science atrium, a glass and steel cathedral dedicated to knowledge. The moment I walked in, I was enveloped. Colleagues, professors from other departments, even the distinguished alumnus who had given the earlier speech all surged forward. They didn't offer polite congratulations. They wanted to talk. They wanted to discuss the nuances of my filtering algorithm, the implications for the search for biosignatures, the future of the Vance Institute. I was no longer Alara the quiet student. I was Dr. Vance, a peer. My voice, which had spent a lifetime shrinking, found its register. I spoke about spectral unmixing and phase-gated polarimetry, with the same ease that Liam discussed hostile takeovers. This was my language. This was my world. It was nearly an hour before I saw them. They were hovering near the entrance, a tight, awkward triangle of unease. They were completely out of their element. Here, the currency was not wealth or status in the conventional sense, but ideas and discoveries. My father's expensive suit and Liam's confident swagger seemed to fail them. They were like tourists who had stumbled into a sacred temple without a guidebook. My mother saw me first. Her face was pale, her smile a brittle painted-on thing. As I approached, a path seemed to clear around me, the crowd parting with a deference that was still new to me. The sudden silence between my family and me felt louder than the preceding din. "Alara," my mother began, her voice a reedy whisper. We had no idea. It was quite a surprise," my father added, his voice gravelly. He looked at me as if for the first time. Not at his daughter, the dreamer, but at this strange woman in academic robes, who people were calling Doctor. He was trying to reconcile the two, and his mind was visibly failing to bridge the gap. Liam was silent. His face, usually a mask of easy superiority, was a complex mess of emotions I had never seen there before: confusion, resentment, and a dawning, humiliating sense of irrelevance. He, the golden child, had just watched his forgotten sister receive an honor so far beyond his own frame of reference that he couldn't even process it. His real estate deal, the pinnacle of his world, had been rendered utterly insignificant. "Oh, why didn't you tell us?" The question came from my father, and it was the one I had been expecting my entire life. The accusation was clear. I had hidden this from them. I had deceived them. I looked at him, at his bewildered face, and I felt not anger, but a wave of profound, weary sadness. I thought of the butterfly sketches, the science fair project, the phone calls, where my tentative mentions of lab work were steamrolled by news of Liam's latest triumph. "I tried," I said, and my voice was even and calm. There was no tremble, no hint of accusation. It was simply a statement of fact. "Many times, but you were never listening. You heard stars and physics, and you stopped hearing me. You heard a hobby, not a career. You heard a phase, not a passion." I let the words hang in the air. I could see the memory of 100 dismissed conversations flickering in their eyes. They weren't malicious people. They were just blind. They had a blueprint for success, and anything that didn't fit those narrow specifications was invisible to them. Liam finally found his voice, and it was laced with a bitterness that was almost comical. "So what, you get a building named after you? What does that even mean? Do you get paid for that?" He was trying to drag the conversation back to a metric he understood: money. Before I could answer, Dr. Thorne appeared at my side, slipping a proprietary arm through mine. "It means, young man," she said, her voice cutting through the tension like a scalpel, "that your sister's work has secured over $20 million in initial grant funding and endowments. It means that Nobel laureates are adjusting their own research based on her findings. It means she has a tenured research position for life, should she want it, and the freedom to pursue any question she desires. In our world," she gave him a withering smile, "that is the equivalent of winning the kingdom." Liam's jaw tightened. My father looked like he'd been punched. $20 million. That was a number he understood. He was looking at me now with a new expression, not pride, but calculation. He was seeing a new kind of asset. My mother just looked lost. "A building," she whispered, as if to herself. "The Vance Institute?" She said our family name as if it were a foreign word. In a way it was. I had taken their name and imbued it with a meaning they had never imagined. "We have to go," my father said abruptly, looking at his watch as if it were a life raft. "The bank." "Yes." My mother agreed, desperate for the excuse. "The bank, Liam's house." They said their goodbyes, a clumsy, stilted series of half-hugs and averted eyes. As they walked away, I saw them huddled together, their backs to me, their voices low and urgent. They weren't celebrating. They were regrouping. Their entire family mythology had just been debunked in the most public way imaginable. I turned back to Dr. Thorne, who was watching me with gentle, knowing eyes. "Are you all right?" she asked. I took a deep breath, the air in the atrium smelling of coffee and floor wax, and the faint, clean scent of new beginnings. I watched my family retreat, becoming smaller and smaller, until they were just 3 people swallowed by the crowd. For my entire life, I had felt defined by their underestimation, shaped by the negative space of their approval. And now, in the wake of the grand revelation, I felt nothing. The craving for their validation was gone, and its absence left not a void, but a vast, quiet peace. My achievement hadn't been a weapon to be used against them. It was a key. It had unlocked a door out of the small room of their expectations and into a universe of my own making. They could stay in that room if they wanted to. It was no longer my concern. "I'm better than all right, Eris," I said, a genuine smile spreading across my face for the first time that day. "I'm free." I didn't need them to see my stars anymore. I was finally living among them. The calls started the next day. The first was from my father. His tone was different, stripped of its usual condescending paternalism, and replaced with a fawning, awkward respect. It was the voice he used for powerful business associates. Ilara?" He began calling me by the childhood name that now felt so ill-fitting. "I was just doing some reading online. This is really something. The Vance Institute. We are so incredibly proud." The "we" was telling. He was presenting a united front, retroactively applying pride to cover decades of dismissal. He started talking about investment opportunities, about setting up a foundation, about how my brand could be leveraged. He wanted to manage my success, to translate it into the language of finance and legacy that he understood. He didn't ask about the science, about the alien ocean, about the thrill of discovery. He asked about the return on investment. I listened politely, giving non-committal answers, and ended the call as quickly as I could. It was clear he hadn't changed. He had just reevaluated my stock price. I was no longer a failed venture. I was an unexpected unicorn, and he wanted in on the ground floor. The call from my mother was more difficult. She was crying. "I feel so terrible, Ilara. We just didn't understand. Why didn't you make us understand all those years you were working so hard, and we thought you were unhappy." Her tears were genuine, but her question was still rooted in the same old blindness. Why didn't you make us understand? The burden was still on me. The responsibility was mine to bridge the gap of their own willful ignorance. She saw my quiet dedication not as focus, but as sadness. Because I wasn't living the life she envisioned, the life Liam was living, she had projected her own definition of happiness onto me and found me wanting. "I was never unhappy with my work, Mom," I told her, my voice gentle. "I was only ever unhappy with being told my work didn't matter." That was a distinction she couldn't quite grasp. We talked for a while longer, a circular conversation of her regrets and my reassurances that it was okay. But it wasn't about forgiveness. It was about acceptance. I had accepted who they were, and now finally I was no longer hurt by it. The most telling silence came from Liam. He didn't call. He didn't text. A week after the graduation, I received a package. Inside was an absurdly expensive fountain pen from Mont Blanc, the kind senior partners give each other. There was no note, just the pen nestled in its velvet box. It was a concession, a white flag, but also a complete misinterpretation of who I was. I didn't need a status symbol. I did my best work on a whiteboard with a squeaky marker. I put the pen in a drawer and forgot about it. My life moved on, accelerating at a pace I could barely control. The Vance Institute was formally established. I was given a corner office with a floor-to-ceiling window, but I spent most of my time in the newly built control center, a state-of-the-art facility that made my old grad school lab look like a garage. I assembled a team of the brightest young minds I could find, researchers who burned with the same quiet, intense fire that I did. We were no longer just looking at one star, one planet. We were conducting a systematic survey, applying the Vance Meridian method to dozens of known Earth-sized candidates. Our days were a blur of data debate and discovery. We found the chemical signature of methane on one planet and the distinct polarization that suggested thick planet-encircling clouds on another. Each new piece of information was a verse in a cosmic poem that had never been read before. My family tried in their clumsy way to be a part of this new life. They invited me to dinner parties where my father would try to explain my work to his friends, getting all the details wrong, but hitting the impressive-sounding buzzwords. "She's basically listening to alien heartbeats with a laser. he'd say proudly, and I'd have to force a smile. Liam, now married, would try to engage me in conversation, asking questions that betrayed how little he still understood. "So when do you think you'll actually find little green men? Because that's where the real money would be in the media rights." They saw the shell of my success, the prestige, the funding, the title, but the soul of it, the pure, unadulterated joy of knowing, remained invisible to them. They were trying to hang my soccer trophy on their mantelpiece, but they didn't realize my prize wasn't a piece of plastic. It was the entire field. The true resolution came about a year after the graduation. I was at the observatory, a remote facility high in the Andes Mountains in Chile. It was my first time visiting in person, my first time seeing the telescope that had become an extension of my own senses. It was 2 a.m. The high desert air was thin and bitingly cold. Above me, the sky was a spectacle of impossible beauty, a riot of stars so thick and bright, it looked like the universe had spilled a jeweler's pouch across black velvet. The Milky Way was a luminous, textured river of light. There were no city lights here, no haze, no pollution. There was only the cosmos and the profound, humbling silence of the mountains. My phone connected to the weak satellite internet buzzed with a notification. It was a video call from my mother. I knew what it would be. It was Liam's birthday, and they were likely gathered around a cake, wanting to include me in their celebration. A year ago, I would have endured the awkwardness, and played my part as the newly valued family member. But tonight, standing under the dome of the heavens, I felt a powerful shift inside me. I looked at my phone, at the smiling faces I knew were waiting on the other side of the screen. Then, I looked up at the Andromeda Galaxy, a faint, fuzzy patch to the naked eye, a sprawling city of 1,000,000,000,000 stars and untold possibilities. I had spent my entire life feeling like I was on the outside of my own family looking in. But the truth was, they were the ones on the inside of a small, warm, well-lit room, while I had been out here all along in the magnificent, terrifying, beautiful dark. My passion wasn't an escape from their world. Their world was a shelter from the sheer scale of mine. I declined the call. I turned the phone off and slipped it into my pocket. The silence that returned was absolute. It wasn't an empty silence. It was full. It was filled with the light of distant suns, with the gravitational dance of galaxies, with the faint, persistent whisper of the Big Bang. My family would never understand my work, not really. They would never feel the vertigo and the ecstasy of staring into the abyss and seeing it stare back with the promise of knowledge. And that was okay. I didn't need them to. My search for their approval had been a kind of gravitational pull, keeping me tethered to a small world. The revelation at my graduation wasn't the moment I won them over. It was the moment my engines finally achieved escape velocity. I drew a deep, cold breath, and for the first time I felt no guilt, no anger, no sadness. Just a quiet, expansive joy. I had my own family, a tribe of fellow explorers. I had my own home, a universe of infinite questions. I adjusted the eyepiece on the telescope, my hands steady and sure. I had work to do. There were other worlds waiting.